All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast here on the E2KG network. I am your host, DBQ Hams, and joining me tonight over on the Wheels of Steel, running the boards, is Game Logicu. Game Logic. How are you, sir? You're checking things out, making sure we are still running, and that is excellent. This is the Enough to Keep Going podcast for the week of June 10th. 2021. This is our pre-E3 show, but really this is our deep dive episode. This is what we thought was going to be a deep dive episode, what we thought was going to be saving our E3 news until we get into next week. We've got the launch of the kickoff of the Summer Game Fest here today. And so we've got some news to talk about there. We've got a couple other news and announcements of things that will and will not be at E3, and some news about a very long leaked trailer that makes its way back out and everybody gets to see a full. But we have to wait a little bit longer to see some gameplay, and that is the new Battlefield 2042 as well. So before we dive into that, let's start with the most timely of news, and that is Jeff Keighley and the Summer Game Fest. So we had a lot of announcements here, and Game Logic, you've got a number here. I've got looking back through here, but I think given the number of announcements, what I kind of want to do is kind of tick through them and give us a chance to kind of talk about ones that we're excited about, ones that are relevant. But I'm going to start with the one that was kind of leaked and rumored last weekend in terms of 2K and Gearbox coming out with a new spin-off game, and we got the formal announcement that it's coming in 2022, and that is Wonderlands. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. So Tiny Tina, the character from Borderlands 2, who had some DLC, kind of fantasy set DLC, now gets Wonderlands. But the other piece of here is we get Will Arnett, we get Andy Samberg, right? We get a number of character actors and comedians in this as well. So any thoughts here? Surprises, the direction of it in terms of being a little more fantasy versus kind of a full-on prequel, sequel type of work that Gearbox has done. And the other piece here, Game Logic, is I don't know that we know who's developing this, right? I haven't seen if this is mainline Gearbox, the mainline Borderlands studio or a spin-off. The last time 2K did this with a pre-sequel, they had another studio working on that while they were working on Borderlands 2. So any thoughts here on Tiny Tina's Wonderlands?
Well, it's going to be interesting, and of course, this is kind of us in the bullpen, right? In the warm-up round before E3, it's a weird. I mean, it continues to be a weird year, right? Now we're in this era where the industry and everything around it is trying to slowly crank its wheels back up on the approach to normalcy. And I saw an announcement today that the Game Awards show is intending that by December of this year that we will be back in full swing, and so they're planning on having that be a physical show again, interestingly enough, in Microsoft Theater. So that might make some other people offended coming to the enemy's territory turf for that show. But the point is that this is the first opportunity for us to see things that cause me to wonder whether or not these are going to be trends that we see as we slide into the weekend of E3. I think one of the things, first of all, is that I think in my own head and maybe some other gamers' heads, there's always this feeling that what Jeff Keighley is doing is somehow in competition with E3. But I got the sense during the show and in the way some of the ongoing announcements, it's not really clear to me what's a Summer Game Fest thing and what's an E3 thing. There seems to be tons of overlap, and it's just a full week on of gaming announcements, and who really cares what show it's part of. They're going to be all semi in-person and semi-virtual events and hybrid events, so it kind of doesn't matter. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, is I'm also wondering how much of 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 this we're going to see as we go into the weekend, which is we don't know anything about this game. Now, we jokingly kind of say that about other games that we see during E3, but there's kind of a smattering, right? There's the games that are kind of out on the edge. There are shows from certain developers and certain publishers, and I'm like, they showed zero gameplay. Or in a year of console launches, you're like, they did a sizzle reel and there was no gameplay. Um, but this is one of the things I think we're going to see a smattering of this across different developers, and this is one of those things where we got a theatrical trailer and we saw some people who were involved in it, both from a talent perspective, but also from a Borderlands character array, listing and some verbiage, but we saw no gameplay. There was mention from Ashley Birch, one of the voice actresses, who the voice actress for Tiny Tina, of some of what the game kind of is. That you're still going to kind of get some of that looter shooter aspect, I think is what she said. I can't remember if she said you were or you weren't, but I do recall that she mentioned. She says it's not a Borderlands game, but I'm like, but you have Borderlands. It's a Borderlands game, right? I mean, this is like saying Apex Legends isn't a Titanfall game, which I admittedly contend that it's not, right? But I mean, it's still in the universe. So I don't know. I mean, this didn't light my hair on fire. You mentioned it seems like you were excited to see an extension of that world, but I mean, how excited were you without any gameplay being shown?
And I think that's, as you said, the larger trend for the coming week here is how much of this is conceptual and how much of this is real gameplay. The thing that struck me about it is we get the, Andy Sandberg, Wanda Sykes, Will Arnett names, but no VO at this point. Like that would have been the time where you, even in a kind of a cinematic trailer, you show the character and have them do a quick quip or something that gives a voice line there. But the fact that there's no gameplay and there's no VO done, or at least VO that's in this trailer, does make me. While I'm interested in the game because of the world and I enjoyed, I shouldn't say I necessarily appreciated, like Tiny Tina's not highbrow humor. But I enjoyed, I enjoy Borderlands and Tiny Tina's DLC. And so I am interested in this. I enjoy all, three of those actresses, those comedians. I think there's a lot of potential. But it also makes me think like this is not this is not a Q4 fiscal year 21. This is heading into next fiscal year, right? This is not going to be a March game. We're going to be looking at something later than that based on just the status.
Yeah, although they did claim early 2022. Right, and I know 2K has delayed games, right? But I mean, but they are a publicly traded company, so they do have shareholders. I mean, the reason you announce stuff is so that people know when and where they should invest. So, I feel like at least it's not a holiday 2022 game theoretically.
Yeah, and in theory they are. I mean, they should be building on the Borderlands engine, so
Yeah.
it's not like they're creating creating a new engine for this. So,
Right.
but I do wonder how much of this coming weekend is going to be when we see an early 2022, or we just get a 2022 tagline. And I mean, I think that this goes back to your earlier point of these are kind of the ripple effects of COVID's last year, of kind of the working remotely, the kind of slowdown in projects that I anticipate that we're not seeing as much, or we're seeing a lot from smaller studios that were already set up in this way, and maybe not as much AAA stuff.
Yeah, and how much, and what assumptions are those?
So yeah.
And what assumptions are those based on, right? So, again, Video Game Award show is, announces that they're planning on doing, in-person awards. That's based on a set of assumptions that everything's going to go well, right? That we're not going to have a COVID-19 relapse, that vaccinations are going to get out, that, and I mean, again, 2020 wasn't just a hell of a year solely because of the COVID-19. It was also because of COVID-19, race riots, and like an election and all sorts of other stuff. So who know? Yeah, we've
No,
got
you're
wars going
absolutely
on.
right.
I mean,
Right, like,
so
there's
who
a
knows?
lot of factors.
Right. So the last things to mention on this maybe is it is next gen platforms, last gen platforms, and PC. No launch on Switch announced, at least as of yet.
Which makes sense if it's built on the Borderlands 3 engine, which is not on Switch at this point. Um, so we kind of get bookended by potential kind of bigger named games in terms of, but a lot of the stuff in between the bookends is interesting to me, but it's not the main stage AAA type of game. I mean, we get some interesting things. We have the confirmed rumor of the 2 Point Campus, which was kind of leaked out there. We get a new Metal Slug Tactics game, or we get the first Metal Slug Tactics game, because Metal Slug is a run and gun type of classic arcade shooter. To move it into a tactics piece becomes something a little different. We do get Death Stranding, which is a bigger profile game, but we get the director's cut of it for the PS5. Um, we get what else? We get this follow up to Salt and Sanctuary, Salt and Sacrifice, another indie studio. We get the going along with indies. We get the next game from Hyper Light Drifter, which is Solar Ash, which we saw a little bit about last E3 or at last E3 ish in terms of Sony's PlayStation 5 announcement. And then we get a game that I'm kind of interested in because I've enjoyed Left 4 Dead in the past, of the Anacrusis. Anacrus. Uh, this is a game, a 4-player multiplayer, co-op shooter. You are 4 refugees. You are 4 characters on a stranded space station or a spaceship being overrun by aliens, and this is done by former Left 4 Dead developers. And was that Turtle Rock was the studio for Left 4 Dead? And so was a new game that I had not heard of, not seen, but it is coming. This is the benefit of having a date attached, or at least a window. It's coming this fall, and it's launching Game Pass and Xbox PC. We get some other new games in terms of another Game Pass game with Planet of Lana, which is. It looks like it's coming to Game Pass, and again, not until 2022. We get Tribes of Midgard, Viking action RPG published by Gearbox, coming in July to PlayStation and PC. And then we get a number of updates in here with some other games. Back 4 Blood gets an August beta. Monster Hunter Stories gets some new stuff. We get some more information on Vampire the Masquerade. We get a Valorant update, some updates on Season 4 for Call of Duty. And then we end with some, again, gameplay or concept pre-rendered video of Elden Ring. So is there a tag on it that says it's gameplay, or are we getting kind of pre-rendered cinematics? Do you have thoughts here?
I do not. So, the realization that I came to today is, of course, I've sat in the background, as I often do with things that I feel like are overhyped. So, the whole time that people were setting trash cans on fire about Cyberpunk, I was just like, okay, we'll just keep an eye on it. And then, of course, it came out and nosedove, and people got all bent out of shape, and I was like, doesn't impact me because I didn't allow myself to buy into the marketing hype of like that game being like the golden chalice of gaming. um and I feel like, and there's this, and I love them, right? Because everybody's got their niche, and you have to love gamers who are in their pocket, and this is the Souls game Sekiro. I know Swissguard is going to kill me for mispronouncing it. I don't know how he says it. Shikiro. with an sh, but it's that same kind of crowd of like the uber difficult kind of game, and the cred that you gain, for being a player of that type. And I'm like, Roger that. See you guys. Have fun. I'll see you guys at the end of 2022 because I have no interest in this game. I mean, it's beautiful. I'm sure it will have like its great game mechanics, but like it's off the radar for me because I'm not. That doesn't fit within my schedule, right? Because I'm not going to dedicate myself to a singular title for a period of time. So I don't know if it was pre-rendered graphics because I didn't watch the trailer.
No, I did watch the trailer, and there's moments when it looks like it could be in-game in terms of a couple of the battles where you're dodging and, the classic kind of Miyazaki Souls-like elements here. But so much of it is really pre-rendered video, and there's not there's not even a tag on the bottom of the trailer that says all in-game footage, right? Like some trailers do at that point. Not that means anything because game engines are power enough to produce some really nice cutscenes. So
and to me that label now, as you mentioned, right, just doesn't really mean a lot to me anymore. Like we're all working on x86 architecture, so great, you're programming it in engine. Theoretically, that engine is going to place shift from the PC you're running it on over onto the PlayStation 5 Xbox architecture with, and Xbox is built on the DirectX framework. So, I mean, I don't really know what it means. It's never really meant a huge ton to me, because there've only been like count on your on one hand the number of games where there's like an egregious difference between what you see in E3 and what comes out. And even if it is, I mean, what really matters is how it looks in parity to everything else that launches, not how it looks in comparison to its E3 footage. So I think I saw that like in the first trailer, and this is I've always used that as a measure of how ready a game is and how confident I can feel in the release date. But with the world as it is now, just as you mentioned, like I don't consider it a mathematical factor anymore.
Yeah, no, I think, and we'll come back to that point in our next news story as well. But I want to kind of see if there's any other. The thing that of these, of the announcements here, and maybe this is just where my tastes are at this point, or the fact that because we're kind of bridging those generations, and even though last year was the generational launch, that game development was not the norm last year, and so we're still kind of in this extended launch period, that we are not seeing the kind of big, amazing, at least at this point, right? I don't feel like I'm super overwhelmed by something shockingly new. We're seeing updates on a lot of things, and the surprise announcements to me feel more like these are smaller studios. Like, some of the Sultan Sanctuary, the Sultan Sacrifice. I find the fact that there's a tactics Metal Slug game kind of interesting in a way. The game that I am also interested in is Tunic, which we saw some more gameplay of, and there's going to be a demo out coming next week to Xbox and PC. So that was a game that was, the little kind of Fox Zelda isometric game that was announced 2018, I think. Let's say maybe 2019 is E3's, but we haven't really seen a whole lot from it since then. And we also had the glider game. What was a glider game called? Sable. Yep. Thank you. Yep. So again, a number of kind of smaller games that are making their way to launch that kind of feel kind of interesting. And I think that's one of the, Jeff Keighley, and this was also an interesting piece because, I mean, it's a nice platform that's not necessarily on one publisher stage or another, that does give some press because it's out early to a number of smaller things or things that aren't necessarily going to be on other stages or in the same way. But then it was all of, I think it was, how long we were talking, it was an hour and a half. I mean, it seemed like by the time we got into 2:00 We were kind of, and then they had other streams. Like we went right from the end of this into another kind of developer diary video with Double Fine, and this is something where we've got a couple of days of this in terms of, and it stretches out. And so the challenge here it's all big, one big E3, game announcement kind of week or 2 weeks is similar to what we had last year in terms of how do you keep track of it all? How do you kind of keep up on it in terms of what's being launched when is certain trailers dropping next, tomorrow we get Deep Silver and THQ Nordic. We get a couple other. We get the Guerrilla Games. We get Wholesome Games coming on Friday and Saturday. Then Saturday we run into Ubisoft and kind of keep stretching our way as we go forward. So it's a little less of a slow drip of games than it felt like last year, because this announcement, this kind of kickoff event, feels a little more robust, which is nice. But again, it's a sampling, it's a buffet, and not necessarily a designer 5-course dish meal here. So, any other thoughts, takeaways from either any of the games or kind of the, as you said before, the platform of how these are presented?
Yeah. So, kind of as you talk through that, right? It's a different feel, and I don't feel like this was the fire hose of games. Like there was no, I mean, I didn't walk away feeling like this is the 33 game sizzle reel of like everything that's coming. It actually it still feels like a bit of a trickle, only in as much as this is a launch year for consoles, and so I still feel like we haven't had that, like, again, going back to past years where there's been like a sizzle reel of 33 games that are imminent and on their way. We've got an Xbox platform where there is no Forza, and we were told that team had just started development, right? So, in questions about whether or not we're going to see a Motorsport this year or a Horizon, which is kind of a weird conversation, to be having. So I think still haven't gotten to that point, but I am excited about what we've seen in a different kind of way. Partially in that there isn't so much of a deluge that you can't keep track of it. That I have mentally in my head this list of games that was announced, but there were a few specific things that I thought were exciting. Don't normally go in for the Kojima-san, kind of design ethos, but I thought it was a very interesting talk. I do love developer talks. We've talked about this, how there are differences amongst the cast. That I think Swiss has been one that he mentioned. He doesn't like the developer talks. I can't remember if that was. I think it was Swiss. Maybe it was Tao. But whereas that is exactly what I want to hear. I don't want to see the VPs and the business people and the sales guys, because they don't flip and know anything, right? I want to see the engineers and the developers and the creative directors and the producers who are on the front line with the troops in the developer alley, right? As people are working on artwork and assets and engines and physics engine, and like putting all this stuff together. So I did take particular note of Kojima's talk that I think it's not just him. I think he's a very deep thinking person. I do like hearing him talk about the creative process. One thing I do like that he acknowledged and talked a little bit about a self-correction, that as he ramps up to work on the next game, that it's not going to be this step-by-step, excruciatingly painful, like drip drab of like every single little thing of him talking about salt shakers on the tablecloth, like, and so maybe next time, maybe that means he's going to work on a gamey game. So there was that. But then I thought it was super interesting how he mentioned how this post COVID-19 era for creatives is very similar to the post 9/11 era, where there is a large scale psychological kind of course correction in how you're going to tell stories. And that to me it's something that I relate to, um, but I thought was incredibly poignant. The thing that I remember impacting me was the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger, and how at the time, I was a science fiction nut and I was very interested in the space race. but I was also heading towards being a history major, so kind of historical events. And I remember my parents talking through like Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy, and I remember how I felt like Challenger was like my John F. Kennedy, right? But also as a person who was in like AP classes and was into creative writing and had like won a couple creative writing contests, like I remember how much stories that I was writing changed after that event. And so I felt that that was incredibly insightful, and I kind of, I mean, it's very sad that that thing has happened, um, but I look very forward to kind of seeing what that evokes from a creative aspect. Um,
That's a
yeah,
really
go
good
ahead.
way to frame that, right? Like I think you're right. There are kind of key political historical types of memories and events that do shape us, and not necessarily in like the forever, but they do kind of shift the way that we think about how we communicate, how we respond, how we view things, and that naturally translates into art and design elements. And so thank you for sharing that, because that is really insightful, and it also will be really interesting to kind of hold that lens up over the next week and see, do we just get lots of, new Battlefield trailers with lots of shooting and everything else, or do we get people who take a shift, and do we get things that look different than we have seen before?
Well, one of the things I think will be interesting, and I think the combinatorial effect of COVID and the intense political scene from last year, I think it's interesting. I'm going to see if people follow Ubisoft, right? When people are like, you're trying to make a statement with like all the political stuff in Far Cry 6, and I'm like, Far Cry 5 had a political ring to it, right? I'm like, and it's a stupid argument, and I've been railing against it since the very last time, and I'm like, you can't tell a story that takes place anywhere outside of a locked room and not deal with what people want to call politics. And I'm like, dealing with morals and ethics and how people absorb them and then reflect or deflect them outwards, like, and interact with the world around them, and any component of that that crosses over any type of governmental structure, you can't, like, Jack Ryan has politics in it, right? The Blacklist has politics in it. Like, all of these stories, the Avengers has politics in it. They had a whole movie about signing an international accord, right? It's stupid to think that you can avoid that topic in storytelling today if you're telling a story about the world. And I'm very hopeful and very interested, and I just wish people would stop talking about it, right? And in the whole diversity thing, and like I go back to the, I'm sure people are tired of hearing me say it, but like if you drop a Terrigen mist bomb on New York in the middle of Manhattan, right, you're not going to get 100 superheroes that are all white Anglo Americans, right? So like I'm hoping people, I'm interested to see it. I'm hoping people just follow Ubisoft's path and just say, yeah, it's got politics in it. Like, we're telling a story that interacts with the world. Like, you can't not, right, have that. Like,
Well, and that's such a shift from 2019, right?
right,
When they're standing up there saying, no, the Division 2 about a citizen militia taking up arms against other citizens doesn't have any politics in it.
right,
There's not politics in this story.
right.
So,
The
yeah,
Walking
I think that's,
The Walking
yeah.
Dead has politics in it. Like, it's a political story of how the world is rebuilt after a like. So I'm hoping people just own up to that and just stop talking about it. The other one of the other things I was excited about was Call of Duty Black Ops. Not so much solely the game, but a shift to me in the industry. This is Activision, who cares nothing about the bottom line. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they are officially more cutthroat than Electronic Arts. I actually think Electronic Arts has more of a um, leaning towards the creative, right, and just their care and helping of smaller studios and some of the indie titles that they do. I think they're way more into being a patron of the art than Activision. Um, and here we have, as Byron Beede or Byron Beatty, I'm not certain how to pronounce his name, as the former general manager of the Call of Duty franchise, has left to go join Electronic Arts, to be their VP and general manager of the Battlefield series. We have a woman, it appears to be a woman of color, who has now succeeded him to be the SVP and general manager of the Call of Duty franchise. Interestingly enough, I did not know that she also was the lead of their esports initiative, right? So this is a person who took Call of Duty and grew it into kind of the esports behemoth that it is, and now her reward, right, is she has succeeded to running the overall franchise. So so it's very interesting to kind of see her, and then to take the stage like within weeks of him leaving, at essentially the equivalent of an E3 event. I thought was interesting. Also, as somebody who's currently under the spell of the Call of Duty bug yet again, I'm interested to see. It's very interesting that in a lot of ways, it's not necessary because Call of Duty is wholly a multiplayer title, right? Really, even though it has some single player stories. To see them taking almost a Destiny 2 like approach, like in terms of you can take that Cold War campaign and string season 1, 2, and 3 together, in terms of a continuing story of, Adler versus Perseus, and now with Stitch, and now introducing yet another villain into the series, and how each of the operators that come in, and I'm not like a really big, like, obviously I'm not a really big Apex fan, but I feel like when Apex introduces somebody, like, you kind of have to. There's stuff that happens not wholly in game, right? There's stuff you have to pay attention to that happens in all these announcements and yada yada. But I feel like if I don't pay attention to any of the press coverage, the whole Call of Duty story, Cold War story, unfolds for me in game, right? And it's only a couple of cutscenes, and it's not really the Destiny 2 like implementation in terms of a story you play through. That would be interesting if we would start to see mini adventures and episodic content in Call of Duty. But even with those little cutscenes, right, you get a sense of like this story that's burgeoning. So I was interested, to see what we've got coming. I was interested in some of the maps that they showed. I've been playing Die Hard Point and Rambo's Gun Game this season, and every time in like the briefcase thing from last year, like every time they introduce these new modes, even for limited periods of time, like, and I think, it's, I don't get that. It's too complicated. I'm not going to try and figure that out. And then I play it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm into this, right? So I'm super excited to kind of see what they're coming forward with, and I liked seeing, their stage presence that was up there. And then the last thing that I'm super excited about is I'll say Back for Blood, but also this trend after, and Tao's going to kill me, but after this trend of like, one show, maybe two E3 shows where we saw like this glut of battle royales, I'm super excited to see the hyper focus on these 4-person squad based, PvE probably. Sorry, there's a alarm going
No,
off.
right. That is pretty much a PVE. That Back for Blood. That also the Anacrusis, in terms of, there is a director aspect in some of that, of having somebody, spawn and design some of the maps and the enemies, but more or less it is for the computer versus kind of the evolve model there. And even I think Evil Dead is in that same direction in terms of kind of that 4-player co-op survival type of thing too.
Well, yeah, in the trend I was gonna say is, you're seeing that trend represented in, as you mentioned, Back for Blood and Anacrusis, and then also the Rainbow Six Quarantine game that we will also be getting in the set of announcements. I can't remember exactly when it's coming out, but unfortunately, that the Resident Evil thing that was kind of in the same vein seems like it didn't really go anywhere after making kind of a small tepid splash out of a Resident Evil 3 remake, but it seems like there's a shift at least to showing some focus in this direction. I guess the other thing to mention is maybe Lost Ark, which we saw in here, which I was kind of excited to see. Just it looks a little Diablo-like. Again, I don't know that anything that we saw was really gameplay, so it was hard to tell what was gameplay and what was cinematic. So there may be a little Diablo-esque design to it, but also, they depicted, large-scale armies on the screen, and I wonder if that's a gameplay mechanic. That would be super interesting.
So Lost Ark is a Korean MMO.
Okay.
That it does make sense that you'd have, whether you'd have large people battles or this is also a spot where there's a lot of game out there to translate and to bring over. And so hopefully it means that there is there's stuff ready sooner rather than later, even if we're not seeing a whole lot of gameplay, that there is gameplay out there because it is an existing. But it's also coming out in 4K and through Amazon games. So we get the delivery mechanism in a little different way as well. And this seemed to be the one big hook that, the Summer Game Fest presented by Amazon Games. This was kind of their only real hook of kind of brand tie-in that I saw during the announcements.
Yeah. Do you think that this will be on Luna?
If they're serious about Luna, yes.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That would be a good indicator.
If they're not, and they're just going to stick it up on a PC to download, then. But yeah, I mean, I think this could be, if it's an MMO that runs well streaming, and somebody can just grab a controller and hop on their Fire Stick or on streaming on their Kindle Fire or anything else, yeah, I could see where that could be very beneficial for them. And for Amazon Game Studios that has really been struggling to create their own games, it certainly makes more sense that they would be in the kind of publishing distribution end more than in the development end at this point. Because Lost World is delayed, if it's even still existing.
Yeah, more likely to be canceled. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what role they play. This could indicate a shift to the kind of infrastructure kind of model that Google is taking with Stadia, supposedly, where, that team is much more of a, we're here to help you integrate your game with our platform, but, you, the developer, are kind of the pointy end of the stick, and you guys will be taking care of that end of the business from here on out, which I think is what Stadia is kind of trying to pivot to. So it would be interesting, after Amazon having fallen over in their development efforts, similarly kind of shift to the same kind of model and partner with development teams to bring their games onto the platform.
So as you were, go ahead, what were you going to say?
And then did you pick up on anything from an exclusivity standpoint, or kind of some keep away games? There were a few games in here. Anacrusis was only listed as coming to Xbox, I think. I saw...
Tales of Midgard is only PC and PlayStation. Okay. So bits and pieces, but not anything really kind of coming out and taunting it, other than Death Stranding on PS5, which isn't necessarily a surprise because it was only on PS4 and then ported to PC, and so it would seem logical that would end up being the same path down the road as well.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, there's a lot of dust being kicked up online about Xbox versus PlayStation, and this is one of the themes, right, to kind of look at, is how we're trying to get our arms around, what is the PlayStation to PC strategy, right? That they seem to be following this thing of like, we're going to keep really, really big titles exclusive to PlayStation and not port them to PC. So I think Swiss has been the one who has contended, like, wondered and speculated if you will never see like a God of War on PC, or kind of these, these vaunted titles that will be, super
Which
special.
I think was the case until a few weeks ago at an investor call, where Sony had a slide up saying, talking about their returns on the PC ports and how they're looking to do more, and you get a Uncharted 4 logo that pops up in that slide deck as well. So definitely something that they are thinking about. Back on the exclusivity piece, the other one that was kind of was out there without any real, without any gameplay or even a trailer or any type of thing, is Deviation Games. That we get the studio from former Call of Duty Black Ops veterans, Dave Anthony and Jason Blundell, that have signed on for an exclusivity. So their studio being spun up by Sony. There's about 100 people with them at this point. This kind of coincides with what Sony had said back in March, that they were funding an original AAA studio from the startup, and that it has, it has some legs and some chops to it with these two behind it, but we don't really know what they're trying to make, other than we got them out there in front and talking with Jeff Keighley just about their excitement. But in some ways, this is very similar to kind of the Respawn announcement of, hey, we left, we're doing something, stick with us, right? Like, and which I think is valid, in, as you were just talking about, in terms of how the designer talks, the developer talks, versus the slick marketing aspect of it. Like, this, for people that enjoy and have enjoyed Black Ops and its variety of gameplay, this has the potential to give people something to look forward to follow along with, to stay invested in social media around this studio, to see what comes next.
Yeah, and we talk about trends that we want to look out for, and I wonder if what we're seeing here is kind of starting to see the blossoming of trying to understand, right? It's always, I almost hate to say it, it's always exciting to see Sony let one shoe drop, right? Because you wonder if now, like, Xbox, say what you will, right, appears to be very open and transparent. Like, we're doing this, like, well in advance, well messaged, clearly signaling their intent, right? Not a lot of questions about what Phil plans to do, right? Then Sony, you're always like, I don't know what those guys are doing, right? You see decisions being made, and then you conjecture, and then it never really comes to. Sometimes they never indicate, right, what the piece of the strategy is and how it all ties together. I wonder if what we're seeing here is, as there's a couple very interesting things that I think the whole gaming community is waiting to see how Sony combats, right, or counters, right? And one of those is, what does Sony do about Xbox's Game Pass, if anything? And then another really big one, maybe the bigger one, is Microsoft is on a tear of acquisition. What is Sony going to do about that, if anything? And I wonder if what we're starting to see, because this is about the third deal that I think that we've seen. One of them is with Jade Raymond Studio. I think there's another studio that they're working with, and now this one. And I think what we're starting to see is a trend of Sony saying, hey, we don't know that we're going to invest in buy studios, because we bought a bunch of studios and stood up a bunch of studios in the PlayStation 3 era. And then as we transitioned out of PlayStation, in the out years of PlayStation 3 over to PlayStation 4, we shuttered a lot of those studios. So maybe rather than invest in, life insurance for all those full-time employees and HR and all the things that come along with that, maybe what we're just going to do is kind of a venture capital, right? Kind of that backing play, that incubation play, and say, look, we're going to help you get up on your feet and get started. And maybe behind the scenes they're infusing them with a certain amount of cash, and maybe there's a revenue share model behind it, and we're going to get you started. And then from there, it's up to you to negotiate with us to kind of be second party, or I know some studios are saying there is no more second party, so maybe they'll be first party but under their own ownership or whatever. And maybe that is Sony's approach instead of the pure acquisition model. Um, and when you think about it, that's kind of what they did with the No Man's Sky developer in some ways.
Yeah, with Hello Games. I mean, Hello Games had done stuff before then, but they definitely supported the development of that game. But I think that that's a very good point in terms of how Sony can help studios spin up, get started, launch an IP, but still not necessarily have to maintain the long-term investment in it. That it is kind of a capital investment, more than kind of a studio creation. That third studio that you talked about is Firewalk, the multiplayer project coming out of former Bungie developers. So yeah, it's lots of, I mean, three big high-profile kind of gaming genre and developers, and good chops there. So we'll see what kind of manifests out of that. Any other thoughts on Summer Game Fest launch before we move into the next one? And the next one actually just came yesterday, as well, as we talked about in the top of the hour, of the full reveal trailer for Battlefield 2042, which, as has been rumored and kind of watermarked, leaked out online for a number of week or two here at this point. But it also, just like we were talking about in the last segment, it was nothing but slick trailers. And I mean, it was all slick pre-rendered cutscenes. And yes, they looked good and kind of gave you kind of they evoked the Battlefield type of moment of, you know, jumping out of a plane and shooting somebody else out of another plane and falling into their plane, or running a four-wheeler off a building in order to blow up a helicopter. You know, lots of kind of big Battlefield type of moments. But the gameplay really gets saved until Sunday on Microsoft stage, and to me, that's I'm interested because of the setting. Like, oh yeah, that looks kind of cool, a little futuristic. You know, the Antarctic of the hovercraft and the tank with treads looks like one of the Snake GI Joe vehicles, and suddenly it's 1984, and I'm getting ready to play with my GI Joes again. But those it could be a lot of fun kind of play sets, but we'll see what that actually looks like, what that looks like in terms of gameplay, and what it looks like in terms of the difference between current gen and previous gen, because it is going to be launching across both gens. And right now we kind of know only the difference of 128 players versus 64 players in terms of maps and population and very large maps. But we've learned some other things in terms of this. We know that we're going to have kind of some classes that the press was able to see 4 of those to start with. It sounded like there were 10 total. And the maps are going to be relatively large. We've got we got 2 different modes and a third mode that is yet to be kind of announced. We get kind of the classic Battlefield mode. We get something that sounds more like Rush in terms of kind of a point and defend, and then kind of classic, classic conquest modes. There we go. I had to think about what Battlefield calls their capture points. So, but we also learned a little bit about their battle pass model, about their revenue afterward. Game Logic, you got any thoughts here on this, or you want to describe a little bit more here?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about this whole Battlefield thing.
Okay, well, let's run with it, because yeah, there's a lot of potential information dumped, but not necessarily. So
so
the floor is yours.
so in general about this game, so this is really going to come down, for me personally, this is really going to come down to the old classic fight of Call of Duty or Battlefield. And it hasn't been a contest for me in the past few years because I got tired of the whole spawn kill, spawn kill, spawn kill effect of Call of Duty since Modern Warfare 2 and beyond, and the toxicity and yada yada yada. I've come back to Call of Duty with a vengeance. I've invested enough time in it to where there are things now that I like describe and can describe in detail of the things that I like about Call of Duty as a multiplayer game. And one of those is I love the small tight maps, right? The the face-off maps, which are these really tight, 6v6, sometimes 12v12 now that they have are these incredibly small maps, like literally in a library, like you're in a room, right? And it's or a game show where you're on a sound stage. And I really like those. I like the slightly larger maps, but the point is that you're always busy, you're always moving, there's not tons of idle time. I fell off of battle royales because there's this super long, excruciating like do loop of looting, and then you get down to these really short seconds of engagement, and I just fell off the wagon about that because I'm just running around for too long. Battlefield fits somewhere now in between, and so the question is going to become, is the do loop too long? Are the long range engagements too long? The last time I was really a big Battlefield player was back on the PC, and then when it made its initial cut to Xbox. And so this is the thing to kind of figure out. The Battle Pass thing, I don't mind. It's essentially you're getting cosmetics. Now, in Call of Duty, you get blueprints, which are kind of ways to they're cosmetics, but they're also kind of a hybrid, and it gives you paths to unlock certain attachments for weapons classes sooner than you might otherwise earn them. Which I think is okay because there's a ton of weapons and a ton of unlocks to get through in Call of Duty. And if you only did it by pure gameplay, you would really have to become like a career Call of Duty player. So I think it's okay. So we're waiting to see if Battlefield's going to do the same thing. I'm fine with the Battle Pass versus the premium. I don't really care. Like, people are going to pay for stuff in Fortnite, and like, if you wanna play free, then you can. I think I saw a study today that said like 65% of gamers in the UK only play free to play games. Like, if that's the kind of gamer you want to be, that's fine. I just don't want to hear you complain about it, because as far as I'm concerned, if you're not paying into the model, then you don't have any right to complain. That's just the way I am about the thing.
No,
Um,
I mean, I think the battle pass thing is so normalized at this point that doesn't seem like a big surprise. In fact, it seems a whole lot more logical than the traditional DLC maps and separating a player base, because it's been shown year after year, at least in the last 3 years, to be a way to keep those players together, to give, and it's been shown to be kind of commercially viable in terms of enough people buy into it to keep that. There hasn't been, unlike the loot box that kind of ran its course, there hasn't been that same type of pushback in a battle pass, and it hasn't run its course into something new yet either. So
well, you still have a pool of players that argues that they should just get content for the amount of time that they put into the game, and I keep trying to explain to gamers that's not the way people work. Developers have these things called children. They like to be able to feed them, right? They can only do so by being paid for the work that they do. So, the expanded size of those maps will create this dynamic too, where um, I'm less interested in playing this game unless I'm playing with a team where I'm on comms, and so that's going to be a certain logistics thing. That's driven inherently by the design of the game and the size of the maps and kind of the general Battlefield approach, which is that it's only really fun if you're really coordinating with other people, right? Battlefield is small and tight enough and tactical enough that there's a lot of unspoken coordination, and where some degree of coordination can happen without direct verbal communications. I think that starts to fall away a little bit in Battlefield. So, that'll be interesting to see. The last thing on it is, yesterday, and even maybe still today, I would say, like, yesterday there was the announcement that there was no single player campaign and that there was no battle royale mode, and the whole of Twitter just fell in a black hole. Like, and I'm like, these wild prognostications of what this meant for the series off of these two relatively small morsels of in data points, and I'm like, there isn't sufficient information that's been announced about this game yet for you to wildly extrapolate an entire business analysis, right, on what this means for EA and their bottom line and their fourth quarter financials in 2023. Like, I just calm down, right? I mean, first, my thing is, first of all, Call of Duty has done this several times, not had a single player campaign packaged in it. Call of Duty Black Ops whatever came before Cold War.
4 didn't have, yeah, Black Ops 4 did not have any
Single
single
player,
player stuff.
right? And despite that, Treyarch was brought back in a shortened dev cycle to lead the way on Cold War. Right now, I don't know if they were if Treyarch was the big purveyors behind the single player campaign, right, or if that lift was really done more so by Sledgehammer, Raven, or whomever. Because I guess it seems like Treyarch has been leading the way of getting away from the single player campaign, and I think more Black Ops players are more about the multiplayer specifically. So my point is that we've proven that there is a market footprint for that, right? That it's not an absolute necessity. And Black Ops 4 was one of the highest selling Call of Duties in the franchise, right? Without the single player campaign. So let's not act as if, like, great Scott, Electronic Arts has done something unprecedented. Like, that's just ridiculous.
And this is only, to me, this just feels, it's good business sense. It's good game design sense. Like, they're in Battlefield 5, their Firepoint Battle Royale kind of landed with a dud and never got off the ground. So why reinvest more resources into trying to relaunch that when people in Battle Royale, people who are playing Battle Royales already have plenty of other options. Basically, what Battlefield can do is be Battlefield rather than try to copy it and be something else. And so I think in some ways that's the benefit of what this is. It's not splitting those resources. I I remember being on the show and being critical of the campaign in Battlefield 5 because running it on a 4K TV, the art assets were flat and pixelated, and while the multiplayer looked really nice, but even that was 2019. Like they were skimping on the single player even back at that point. So why not just focus the energy, the art assets, the development time? And if they're doing seasons like you talked about with Call of Duty, where they can stretch some story out, they can tell some narrative pieces, there's lots of options on how they can engage narratively and creatively with this, that they don't need to split their player base and their development time.
Yeah, and look, I love world war stories, right? I'm one of the few Battlefield players that actually played through them in their entirety. I actually felt that, whether or not graphically or not, but from a story perspective, the Battlefield 5 war stories worked together as a contiguous piece more so than the Battlefield 1 war
Yeah,
stories.
Battlefield 1 is just their vignette. I mean, they're nice little intro pieces.
Yeah. I mean, it was super exciting for me to, like, you know, say what you will about playing the bad guys, right? But the notion, and again, I'm a history major, right? So this was of particular interest to me, right? Playing as a World War II tank commander in Nazi Germany, as like the Allies were like closing down and about to pull this thing to an end, was an incredibly interesting historical piece for me to play through. And that's what I feel like from a Battlefield perspective, right? That is kind of that, like, Call of Duty doesn't really model, right, historical settings, right? They make maps, and they're great map designers, but the maps are all individual pieces of creative design. Battlefield is the one that really has the moniker for going off, to me, and like modeling like actual historical settings. Now this is 2042, so it won't necessarily be historical, but there's probably a greater likelihood here to kind of see some real world mapping, right, in certain battle areas, and see those implemented within game. But I agree with you, right? The whole point of Battlefield is really this notion. Battlefield never needed a battle royale, because Battlefield already kind of cuts in a niche that is its own and has its own space that's carved out, which is it makes you feel like you're part of a fire team or a platoon or a larger scale army, right, attempting to achieve an objective instead of like these squad based games. So I think there's proven room in the market for it. It's been done before. It's not something new. And again, it's a healthy pivot, as you mentioned, right? There's things that worked and didn't work in Battlefield 1. There's things that didn't work for Battlefield 5. Why in the world would you try them over again? So I'm excited to see what happens with this game. I don't know that I'm going to play it, but I am excited to see. I'm excited to see something on the map that may bring us back up to a parity between the Call of Duty and the Battlefield franchise, to where there's actually a competition. Which I think the last time we saw that was Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty World War WW2 was that year, which was 2018.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, Battlefield 1 was 16.
Okay. All right. So and then
Yeah.
they followed with WW2. So
Yes, right, because it was Battlefield 1 and Infinite Warfare, and then WW2 came after that.
yeah.
Yep.
So going through those eras, it's not that often that we get years where both franchises are hitting on all cylinders, right? In this, you know, it's a dice roll, but we have the potential to have that fight again. And I think it was I'm getting the years mixed up, but one year they released within like 2 weeks of each other. The year that Titanfall 2 got crunched
Yeah, they
in
got
between.
released within a month of each other, and Titanfall 2 gets squished in between it in 2016.
Yeah. So it'll be it's exciting. Look, we have two of the biggest multiplayer first person shooter franchises with releases coming out this year that both company appear like they're putting huge resources behind, and they're coming out on next gen consoles. So that to me is an exciting time, and particularly with Battlefield having skipped last year. So I'm excited to see what they do with the DualSense controller. because the Call of Duty's implementation with that has been so good. So I'm very curious to see whether or not there'll be mouse and keyboard support on consoles, right?
Yeah, that
So
would be right, especially if they're going to be on the Microsoft stage come Sunday. I'm really interested to see what gameplay actually looks like, and you're right, like the PC integration, the mouse and keyboard integration, how that plays out, and if being on the Microsoft stage, do we get any type of Game Pass hook, or does EA do something like what they just did with Knockout City in terms of it's free for the first 2 weeks, or is it? I'll be really interested. It wouldn't be that much of a surprise because it's been rumored, but from a market kind of standpoint, I would be surprised at that because they're already coming out and it's a $60, $70 game on new consoles and there's pre-orders up. So
yeah, it's tough. It's so hard to make a call on that, man, because and I've seen lots of speculation on Twitter about, people shouldn't ask for Battlefield to be on Game Pass because that's not what it should be, and I'm like, that's, again, Electronic Arts is a multi-billion-dollar company. Like they don't need you like tilting at a windmill, jumping in front of other gamers to champion like what they should or shouldn't do. Like, and I don't know that it's not the right thing for them to be on Game Pass because they put FIFA, right? FIFA's their biggest earning franchise, and it's on Game Pass.
I mean, it comes 8 months later. I mean, FIFA came in April and it launched in September, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a delay, but yeah, it's there.
Right. So who knows? Yeah, it's tough. It's the world's changing.
I could also see that it could be something where, not that we wouldn't know this now, but I could see that same type of model of come season 2, it goes to Game Pass because now everybody has purchased. You've gotten everybody who is going to purchase it, who's going to buy in, but now suddenly if it's on Game Pass and you're asking for $10 for a battle pass, that's a little, that bar of entry is a whole lot lower than $60, $70.
Yeah, it's tough to say. I mean, but it could also, I could also see it. It comes to Game Pass on day and date, and it's on Game Pass, kind of like Call of Duty launched, right? It was out, you paid for it, and then season one didn't really start, right? So everybody was able to just play multiplayer, kind of what you really, and I didn't know it at the time, but what thank goodness I spent time in Call of Duty. But what they really wanted you to do was make as much progression as you could before season 1 dropped. And I could see Battlefield launching on Game Pass, and then in the walk up to season 1, look, it's only on Game Pass for a limited time, and then right before season 1, right, we're gonna ask you to pay for it, right? You can buy the bundle, right, with the game and the first season Battle Pass. I don't know, but to me, it's not entirely the conversation on Twitter, as I've seen some people will want to do, right, basically romp and stomp and fireball and scream fire, that it's not even in the realm of possibility, right? And I'm like, tell that to Bungie, right?
Right? That's exactly what we did. Is Beyond Light was free, but you didn't get the first season. You got the campaign piece and all the other world, but you don't get the season. You have to buy in for that piece. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and even in, what was it, New Light before that, right, when they first went free to play. So, again, one of the biggest first-person shooter franchises on the planet, right? Like, so, not out of the realm of possibility, right? The key thing is we just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. From an industry perspective, I'd love to see it just because it shakes up like what we expect for models, and that's not necessarily bad. So yeah, we will see. So we've got a lot more to see actually over the next couple of days, and ahead of us we've got Ubisoft, we've got Microsoft, we get the E3 kickoff, we're going to get some Nintendo announcements, and we're going to be back here, all 4 of us, next week on the Enough to Keep Going podcast, where we'll do an extended E3 wrap up. So this was kind of our first taste of game announcements and news around the E3 Summer of Game Fest kind of launch and experience, let's just say. But next week we'll come back at this with a much more comprehensive view, things that have gone on over the course of the E3 and Game Fest week here, to see what else we have to talk about, and hopefully some of that excitement, some of that hesitation, we've got a little more information so that we can bring it back to you, our viewers and listeners, and please join us back next week, where it will be myself and my lovely, talented, thoughtful co-host tonight, Game Logic Q, and we will also be joined by Swisscar and Talmaster99 next week on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. Any final thoughts, Game IQ, before we head out?
No, it's going to be a long weekend and a rough week.
It will be. Yes, I have decidedly merged my work calendar and my E3 announcements calendar, so I can make sure that if I'm overlapped for a meeting, that I know what to catch up on. So, but yes, it'll be a long weekend, but it should be enjoyable, and at least we are only coming at it with one podcast this year, where in years past sometimes when there's been big stage shows, we've tried to squeeze in multiple podcasts, and so this should give us a lot to talk about. But just be prepared for a long and a robust show next week, which should be exciting.
I think
go ahead.
I think we're being way overly optimistic. I think we could easily do 2 shows. I'm actually living in great fear that we're going to be overwhelmed, but it'll be interesting to see it unfold.
Well, and if we decide to split, then great. I think that could be, if that serves us better to do that, then that's excellent. It means we have a lot to talk about. It means we have a lot to be excited for, or to stand on our soapbox and shake our grumpy old man fists into the wind about too. So now that once we get Swiss and Tao back, maybe we do have enough grumpy old men in here to make sure we split this podcast into 2 for next week. But either way, come back, tune in, whether you're watching us streaming, whether you're joining us on your favorite podcast app, or finding us on YouTube on the Enough to Keep Going channel. Please feel free to join us each and every week here on the E2KG network. So for myself, DPQ Hams, and Game Logic Q, we are Enough to Keep Going. This has been plenty to keep us going tonight. So for myself and for all of us here, play the games you love. Love those you play with. Take care of yourself.